Greetings, everyone. I'm Tim Anderson, aka Renfail, and welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs. Tonight, we're going to be talking about open world and group content in games. I am once again joined by Jesse, aka Scribbles.
Scribbles here. I'm a co-founder of Ninja Loot Games, and we are working on the MMORPG Defend the Night. You can check us out in the links below. And I'm just here to talk about MMORPGs.
And we are also joined by a special guest tonight. If you want to introduce yourself, however you would like to, talk a little bit about your game, what you're working on, so on and so forth.
Yeah, so I'm Judah Perez. I go by the CookieDragon. I am currently working on TwoKinds Online. It is a MMO based on the webcomic Two Kinds. Yeah, it's very anime style, toon shaded, open world RPG that we're working on. It's a lot of fun. We've been working on it for a while.
Cool.
Very,
Well,
very cool.
tonight, since we're talking about, we're all in the MMORPG space, all of us, we've all worked on MMOs, we're all passionate about those games. The one thing, I think if we go back to the root of what MMORPGs are, at least for me, I'm gonna give my explanation of the sort of industry. Like the first versions of online games were like, I remember Shadows of Eusebius, which was Sierra Online back when you had to pay per hour to play, um, which was mid 90s, I think. And then shortly after that, we had like Ultima Online and Everquest 1. And those games were heavily influenced by MUDs, which in and of themselves were heavily influenced by tabletop games. And every time I ever think about this, and I know for a long time I've used this quote in many of the photos that I put out there on social media and stuff with Saga Lucimi over the years. I've always loved looking at the quotes from Gary Gygax from D&D days, where the essence of a role playing game is getting together with a group of friends and having that shared experience. And like something that I like to quote is D&D is almost never, tabletop games are almost never about one person sitting down across from a table with one other person. It's always four, five, maybe six or eight, but at least, 3 to 5 people who are getting together to have fun. And that's that multiplayer component. And when that transferred over to online games, we got the massively multiplayer online role-playing game because we just took that aspect of role-playing games and playing it with your friends, and then we went international with it, and now you can play with people all around the world. But over the years, and this kind of ties into one of the episodes we did before about games that have been mislabeled and mismarketed. I don't want to dive too far, of course, but I know in that episode we were talking about, the evolution of the industries and how the term MMO and MMORPG have sort of they're being used for lots of different games these days. So when it comes back to open world and group content, is how do you define excuse me, how do you define a group-based game? Like what makes an MMO? And I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that.
That's a challenging one. Right now, for just personally for me, what makes the open world style group content MMORPG would be just like you said, with playing with your friends. But I don't want to eliminate that. I still want to be able to like hop in and be in the world and work on my gathering skills all by myself. My friends don't have to be there. I still want the the freedom to do whatever I want when my time allots it. Like if I only have an hour to spend on the game, I want to be able to be in that world because I'm loving that world and I'm being part of that world. So I like the solo play sometimes. I like the group play as well because you need to have those shared experiences because that's where your memory banks come into play and you remember those shared experiences with your friends overcoming a vast large obstacle of that huge boss or that large dragon. it's definitely interesting to me. I don't know. It says massively multiplayer online game. Uh, what is massively? I really can't answer that question because there's so many things that are labeled massive right
Hmm.
now that aren't totally massive. So I mean,
The yeah, sorry. The MMO genre is really broad, but which is why I like going back to the virtual world definition of
Somebody
like
said that too the
it's
other
that
day.
shared it's the shared space, it's the shared world, the shared persistent world that's that's more than just you or this little instance space that you might share with a group. It's this larger world. And like and this is like I really like the history of MMOs and MUDs and how it all came together.
I think you're on the right track too, because I think it was one of our community members, Adric, left a comment. I think on the mislabeled, mismarketed video where I think he said he prefers the terminology virtual world,
Hmm.
and I think that that's an interesting take on things because in his comment, I think he was referring to how, like with Ultima Online in particular, now I'm blanking on his name. Um,
I'm a big fan of like Bartle and Raf Koster.
that's the guy.
Yeah,
Coster was saying that he
Koster.
preferred to use the term virtual world for Ultima Online as opposed to the MMORPG. So I think that's an interesting take on things because essentially that's what they are. And my wife is an example. She's not really a big gamer, but she knows enough because I've been doing this now for a while that she's at least clued into everything that's going on. And we were on a walk the other day and she was asking about virtual reality, like, headsets, everything else. She says, well, I think that's going to be the next big thing. And I was like, it was funny hearing it from a non-gamer who's looking at it from the outside going, well, I think that's going to be the next stage of evolution for online games. And I went, that's what we all hope. I mean, that's what we're all aiming for is that virtual reality gets to the point where we can actually go beyond mouse and keyboard and controllers and actually be immersed in that. So I like that terminology a bit more than MMO.
yeah.
But yeah, what
I,
defines massive?
I think like we were talking about MMORPGs just being a term to sell volume of clients. Uh, I do think the I'll go back to Chronicles of Illyria. I do the meow method, multiplayer uh, online evolving world. That's what it is. It's the meow, but it's so just so ridiculous the saying. But yeah, I mean that's phew. I think we actually need to recategorize. I think we went on that topic a couple weeks ago. Check out that last episode we did about what was it? Mismarketing
Yeah,
games.
mislabeling and mismarketing
Mhm.
games.
And really that's what it is. It's marketing. It's like how are you going to describe the game to the players?
And there's yeah, and I don't. That's the weird thing is because there's only so many categories that are out there, and if you don't have it in that right category, it's not going to sell. And I'll also say this for Amazon as well because I know, I mean, I've been selling books on Amazon for 10 plus years now, um, and it's also very important, and it's interesting because your book might not fit into one of the categories that Amazon has available for you to choose from. But if you don't put it in a category, it won't sell. And so you have to be very selective. And sometimes it's hard. It's like, well, I'm not really that, but yet I'm having to put my book in that category because no one knows how to define what I have yet. So
Right.
that's an interesting look at things. Um,
I guess just more labels are better to sell things.
so
I
the first question I have on here is, what do you think? What defines group based? If we're talking open world group content, what defines group based? I
yeah.
can give you mine. It might be a little ranty, and then I'll let you guys go because I don't know
Yeah.
I don't know where you
Go,
guys'
go.
headspace are at. But um, I've always defined group based gaming as anything that requires a group of people to complete. Um, So you could think, say, EverQuest. You could go off and kill orc centurions by yourself. That's not group content. But if you want to go into Crushbone, at on level, non-twinked, the way it was meant to be played when the game was designed, if you're going into Crushbone or Karnar's Castle or any of the dungeons, you needed to go in with a party of 6. Everybody had to be on par. You had to have a balanced group. You needed a tank, a healer, crowd control, DPS, utility, etc. Um, that to me is group based content. It's content that requires a coordinated effort by the players working together to overcome the challenges of the game. That's how I define group based gameplay. I don't know about you guys.
I'll let you go.
Oh, I wouldn't argue with that. It's really anything that requires like 2 or more people to complete. I usually think like dungeon runs.
Sure. Yeah.
Like
I mean, dungeon runs are great. Yeah.
yeah,
And
not and MMOs. Not everything has to be group based, but there needs to be that balance because one of the things that's bugged me is like the together alone feeling in a lot of MMOs. Yeah, exactly. Like that's always bugged me. Like and like heavy single player stories in MMOs.
I'm torn because I'll tell you one thing. One of the things I love, and my brother and I we have a somewhat similar opinion, but somewhat divided opinion as well about Star Wars: The Old Republic because when it
Mhm.
launched, it was way more group based than it is today. But I actually like the changes they've made to the game. I don't think it's an MMO anymore. I don't know why they keep marketing it as an MMO because it is very much a single player game these days with a multiplayer component. But it's absolutely that part of it's the together alone thing is kind of annoying. But I will say that they have a very streamlined single player experience, which if you can strip that out of your head and say this isn't an MMO that I'm playing, it's a game that's been redesigned as like a single player game with a multiplayer component. I think you can have a lot of fun in it, but it's also tricky because they still market it as an MMORPG, but you're really just running around because even if you're on like any of the space stations, it's just like hundreds, if not thousands, of players running around together, but no one's talking to each other, no one's doing anything together, other than perhaps raids
Mhm.
and world bosses.
So
Yeah,
is it considered an MMO because it's always online? Is
no,
that where that definition's at
no.
now?
There's single player games that are online, which is terrible. Uh,
What single
yeah,
player what single player games are online? I'm trying to think off the top of my head.
Just Outriders just released. I
Outriders.
think that's
But
mostly single player.
okay, that's what I was going to ask. I haven't played it yet, but
I haven't played it either.
my understanding was that it could be played single player, but it also had a co-op mode. Um, but I know the controversy because Jesse, you were sending me some stuff a couple weeks back when it launched because they were under fire for having this single player component that required you to be connected to the internet. It's like, didn't Diablo 2 or Diablo 3 do that back in the day? But their excuse was it was tied to DRM, like to try to cut down on pirated copies or something. I feel like that might be
Oh yeah,
true.
that was a Diablo 3 issue
Diablo 3 was what it
too.
was.
Yeah.
I remember that from a long time ago. I didn't play it when it launched, but that just popped into my head as something I was remembering. Though, didn't that happen? Or am I just
Yeah,
old and I'm forgetting things? It
yeah. I'm not.
happens.
Not really a fan of that. Single player online games. Uh, you should be able to, if you buy like for me, if I buy a single player game, I want to be able to play it not online. I mean, I don't want to have that internet connection. Could you guys go back though to what is it? What was the term that you used? Together alone? Is that
Mm.
Yeah, Together Alone.
uh, is that like something like you're playing? You just do matchmaking and you don't really know people, or how does that
Well,
term
not
work?
that this is I'm not even talking about like grouped content. Unless we're talking about like grouped content where literally no one communicates and you're on a team but you're running off alone. Um,
I would define it for me. Together alone is if I think a good example of this would be any open world zone in an MMORPG, World of Warcraft, Lord of the Rings Online, you name it, and there might be 50, 100 players running around in that zone. None of them are talking to each other. None of them are
Yeah.
role playing with each other. None of them are. So I always look back to say EverQuest, and I don't want to look at that game with too much of the rose tinted glasses, but and some of this just maybe the generational evolution of games. But back in the day, because even the overland content was quite difficult and tricky, even you could solo stuff, but it was very difficult. They definitely were pushing you towards grouping up with people. But if I had to give it an example, I would say it was like 85% group-based content and 15% solo content. The solo content that did exist was hard enough that you needed buffs from other players. You couldn't just go out there unbuffed. Like you had to have buffs from other players. And so there's this system where even if you were alone soloing things, people would run by and they would stop and they would buff you and they would hang out and make sure that you were going to make it okay and maybe hang out for 30 45 minutes and talk with you and role play and chit chat. Might be 3 or 4 people hanging out with you and they weren't trying to kill steal. They were just there hanging out, chilling, relaxing and just interacting with you because they knew that they might be in that same situation at some point in their downtime and they would want someone to do the same to them. As opposed to today, where, say, World of Warcraft, where anybody who tags a mob gets credit for the loot and faction and everything else. So it's just you got 50 players together in the same space, but they're never interacting with each other. They're just trying to tag all the mobs so they can get credit and stuff. They're not buffing each other. They're not
Mhm.
interacting with each other, and the only time anybody ever talks to you ever is if you need to group up and go do a dungeon. That for me would be the together alone thing where you're in a zone, there's other people, but no one gives a shit about you. They don't want to talk to
Yeah,
you.
that's my thought. It's like when you're in a zone and you're just running around doing quests and you don't have any reason to talk with anyone. And that's like it's like okay, yeah, you're in the shared world with a bunch of people. It's like yeah, there should be some content that you can do alone. Like I think crafting is a great example of like you don't really need
Harvesting.
to interact with anyone. Harvesting, yeah, but
Yeah.
there's definitely got to be a balance there.
It'd be good to have benefits to just get out there and socialize with people. Maybe they have something that you don't have, and you need that to be awesome, or to
Hmm.
overcome that obstacle, or to make it a little easy gameplay a little easier. Like I know in EverQuest, going back to EverQuest, that I know that you sat around in different areas, so just waiting for that buff, so you get that buff, and you could you have way more hit points, and then you could go play for another 45 minutes. But then you had to go back and you had to communicate with everybody else and see what was happening, and wait for those substantial buffs to become available again. Um,
I think
yeah, I remember.
EverQuest's. Go ahead. Sorry.
No, it's fine.
Um, EverQuest also did a good job of incentivizing people to want to group up because you got an XP bonus.
Hmm.
For it was the more people in your group, the more of an XP bonus you got. So the more people in your group, the faster you leveled. And that was a nice incentive above and beyond the fact that not only were you getting better XP, but if you had people in your group who could buff you, you didn't have to do the back to town buff dance because you could just go out there for 3 or 4 hours and play. But I will also say that I know Star Wars: The Republic tried to do this, and it worked somewhat in the beginning. They have it's still in the game, but it's useless now, which is the social system. So the way it worked is if you went and did an instance, a dungeon, they call them flashpoints. You go do the flashpoint with your friends, and you get dialogue trees, and everybody in the group gets to pick what they want what action they want to be taken during the dialogue sequences. And then it rolls a die and somebody's choice is the one that gets chosen. Now everybody gets social points for those flashpoints. So anytime there's dialogue, you're getting social points, um, and those are racking up. And there's a ranking system. And then what there was is there was these special vendors on the planets that had gear that you could only get if your ranking on the social system was high enough. So like tier 1 would be on Coruscant, and if you'd run 3 or 4 of the flashpoints, you would have like the T1 social ranking, and you could go buy this cool cosmetic gear for your character. And it was an interesting concept, except when they pushed the game to the solo version where you didn't need to group up with anybody. No one uses that anymore. Plus they added the cash shop with the cosmetic gear, and you could just get all the cool cosmetic gear from the cash shop instead. But it was an interesting concept in the beginning because they were trying to incentivize players to want to group up with each other above and beyond just for the group content. It was like, oh, well, there's also this, you can get cosmetic gear for your companions, you get cosmetic gear for yourself, you get special weapons and all this other stuff. It was an interesting way to try to incentivize players to group together.
I think a
Unfortunately,
big thing. I think a big thing is just difficulty.
yes.
That's the big thing. If your game's too easy, there's no reason for you to go outside and have
It's all solo content. Yeah.
yeah. You don't have to have those players. But the thing about it is, those kind of games are flashy. You can have lots of action, combat, and mow things over, and that's kind of fun too for some people. Just I don't know, for virtual worlds or MMORPGs, I think it's kind of outside what I like as a gamer.
I think that's
I'm old
why.
school though, so it's not for everybody.
No.
I definitely on the outskirts of what is popular now. So
Yes.
I'm niche.
Yeah, and if you go too far to for the requiring group content, you get Final Fantasy 11,
Yeah.
right? Where
And
it's like you have to have a group for everything.
I can speak to that too because in the early alpha tests for Saga, we were still very much at that point in time, like back 2015, 16, we were very much, you need a group for everything. And eventually we as we started adding balance to things, we pulled that back and started approaching it more from an EverQuest perspective of say, here's a town. If you go out from the town, everything within the direct vicinity of a town or a city should be relatively safe. You should be able to go out there and solo so that when you've only got 15 to 30 minutes to play, you can do that. Now, you want to go to that dungeon over there? That's when you have 3 hours to play. And when you're coordinating with your friends and you know you're going to be online for a few hours and you're going to go do that dungeon together. But you don't go in there when you only got 15 minutes. That's the
Right.
around the town stuff. But I know we did have some people who rage quit during some alpha test sessions because it was like they would get in and they were like, I can't even fight a deer. This fucking sucks. And it's like, well,
I, I, re- I remember doing the same thing in Saga. It's like I got mowed down by like a small deer
level
or
one little baby deer and it just wiped you off the
what?
map.
What? I'm not powerful? That's not cool.
And it was, granted, we hadn't done any balancing in the early days, so it was like you could get
Yeah.
one shot by a baby deer. So, that's a little overkill. But
Yeah.
yeah, if you go too far in that direction, like you said, you get to the Final Fantasy 11 scenario, or I would even argue in the current era that we're in, it's even hard to pull off an EverQuest style game because people have become so accustomed to the ESOs and the Warcrafts
Flashy.
and where they have an unlimited amount of solo content and only have to group up. Actually, they don't have to group up. They only group up when they want to. Like there's no content that actually progression like you can what I'm getting at is there's no level progression. Like you can go from 1 to max without ever grouping up with another player in almost every game on the
Mm.
market and you only do dungeons to get good gear. Um, which I feel is not
Yeah.
the way it should be done.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Go
yeah.
ahead.
Oh, okay. I was about to say it's like yeah, as much as like the soloable content is that it I say as much as it bugs me, I do very much enjoy Final Fantasy 14. So it's just like
And they've got I haven't played that one a lot. I've dabbled in it from time to time, but as I understand it, that one is I'm trying to remember because don't they call them trials? I was
they
because
have
I've
they
never
have
gone
the
beyond the
dungeons.
first. I've never gone beyond the first, the Realm
So
Reborn. So
so yeah, in the main story they still so most of the main story it's solo content because you're just running around doing things, but they do have mandatory dungeons that you got to
yeah,
run with light party, which is 4 people, and then they have a variety of other dungeons and trials that are like boss content that require 4 to 8.
Yeah, because I
So,
remember doing dungeons and then getting up to the trials. I don't know, level 50 or something. I never
mhm,
finished Realm Reborn because I just played it and I got into it like a few months and I was like, I just wasn't, yeah, it's just not the game for me. But the one thing I did like about that though is that at the very least, they make it easy to find group mates to
mm,
do the dungeons because that's the complaint that a lot of people have about old school EverQuest. I didn't have this problem. But a lot of people have complained that what Jesse was mentioning earlier, sitting in town waiting for a buff, a lot of other players would be sitting in town waiting to find a group. I was always an officer in a guild, so I never had that problem because it was literally I would log on and I was a person of importance, and so I would immediately within 5 minutes have a group. Plus, I always scheduled my sessions, so it was like I'm going to be playing Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Saturdays from 7 to 10. These are the 5 people I'm taking with me. Logging in, we're ready to go. We roll out. Um, I know a lot of people have spoken to the pros of matchmaking systems because they do allow you to easily jump in. Um, and that does work for Final Fantasy XIV. I'm of the opinion, I mean, this is another conversation, but the downside to the matchmaker system is that you might not ever see that person again. Um, but on the plus side, it eliminates that need to sit around for 4 hours trying to find somebody to run this specific dungeon.
I'm in agreement with you, but like I said, that's kind of a different conversation.
Yeah, I mean, we could rant about it, but yeah, I do Final Fantasy 14. I think they've done a good job of melding single player with group-based content.
Hmm.
Because I haven't gotten that deep into ESO, but ESO doesn't have any mandatory group content that I can think of. I think it's all just optional. I could be wrong on that front.
So
Um,
my experience with ESO is I played during the beta at some point. I didn't have to talk to a single person until we all got stuck because the quest broke. So
mm,
we were all in a dungeon, or we were all in a temple somewhere waiting for like this quest, like something we had to interact with was gone and broken. So we were all there. It's like, oh hey, we might as well chat with everyone. We're all
try to
just
figure out
waiting.
what's going on, hang
Might
out
as well
with
start a
people.
dance party. Yeah, that was like the only interaction I had to have with people there, just because we were all stuck in this situation trying to advance the story.
Well, thinking
Yeah,
about, go ahead, Jesse. Sorry.
yeah. Both those games. I'm glad that you guys are on because I don't have any dog in this fight because with Final Fantasy, I'm not a fan of the genre or the JRPG. Well, I like some JRPG, but not that series.
See, I love JRPGs.
Yeah. See, uh, but and then with ESO, um, the cutscenes drove me nuts. So I'm not a cutscene guy. I like cutscenes every now and then when something's epic and voiceovers are epic. You got this epic story, but I don't want to sit there through it all the time. So it's one of those things where I'm just too ADHD. I need to go, fight stuff, kill stuff. Rage and you know advance my character. So that was just too slow for me. Those games are too slow for my sort of you know personality.
Well, that
But I like to hear that what you guys are talking about though. It's definitely cool.
that gives me a segue into the next
Mhm.
point, which is the difference between, when we're talking open world content, group-based content. Um, we've talked about examples of group-based gameplay, EverQuest, Final Fantasy 14, etc., where there are dungeons that you have to do, so on and so forth. Then there's games like, we have Guild Wars 2, which has these open world encounters that people can participate in. They're not mandatory, they're just there. Same thing, Star Wars Old Republic had them. Vanguard even had them. I mean, EverQuest 2 had them, the open world bosses they're not for progression, they're just there for everybody to go,
Mm.
you know, compete on. I don't, from, my own personal standpoint is I don't know that I necessarily consider those content per se because they're just there. But the question I would have as we segue is, looking at the difference between a sandbox environment where you choose what you're going to do versus an on the rails guided experience, the theme park, so to speak, which one is better? Is it better to have a blend of the two? Or what's your guys' preferences and what's your thoughts on that? Because um, I could think of games like Elite Dangerous where they just drop you in and there's no like it's just have fun. And I tried it and I was like, I'm not having fun. But on the same token, I had fun in Everquest, and Everquest was the same shit where they just dropped you in your starting zone with a sword, a rusty sword, and said good luck. So I've been trying to figure out in my head why one of those versions worked for me, but the other one didn't. But they're both sandbox environments. And then I look at games like Lord of the Rings Online, Star Wars: The Old Republic. These are games that I play, over the years, and I like the way that they guide you. But then I look at World of Warcraft and I hate their quest hub system. It drives me nuts. Like I can't stand the quest hub to quest hub to quest hub. Maybe because there's no interconnecting story, whereas opposed to Lord of the Rings Online or Star Wars: The Old Republic, you have an actual like class story that's moving you from these places that keeps you going. So I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts on that. Like, how do you feel about theme parks versus sandboxes and open worlds, and what do you think is a good balance point for that? And examples that you might have seen, good or bad.
You want to try that, Judah?
Yeah, sure. No, I like a balance of the both. Oh, and talk about like what Elite Dangerous. It did not mesh with me at all either. It just dropped me off, and it's like, okay, I have nowhere to go, or no idea where to go. But I compare that to like No Man's Sky, where it starts you off on a planet, and it's still a big open sandbox, but I felt way more like I knew better what goals I had to do trying to jump to different systems. Like, and I don't know why, and I don't know why the two just felt so different, even though they're both space sims or space, not even sims, space games. Um, and then, but yeah, like I like the sandbox. I like theme park every once in a while. I am not a fan of WoW, so I'm just gonna say that in general. It just did not mesh with my how I like to play at all.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I'm totally different. I do a lot of role playing. I'm one of those guys that do a little bit of role playing in the game, and I'll actually make my own stories up along the way. So having less rails or having no rails at all, and maybe just a little tad of storyline in there for epic quests, like I was telling, just the bigger quest lines, having those maybe have a cutscene. Those are what work for me. Not everybody, but I like to have the player make his own story for what he likes to do. Just to have, this is your world. This should be your world. You should be able to change the route that you play. You shouldn't have to say, talk to everybody and get a quest from them to feel like you matter in the world. You should be able to make your own quests. Um, so that's just, one of the things that I feel in the game that would make me attracted to it the most. Does that make sense to you guys?
I think one of the ways, and I've told this story somewhere before, but at one point in the history of Saga, I was interviewing a trio of brothers who were thinking about maybe coming on and working, and they had never played EverQuest. They'd only ever played Warcraft, and during the interview process, the question was asked of me, well, what are you doing for content in the game? And I said, it's a sandbox game, and there are quests, but our quests are epic in nature. So the only quests that we're writing are quests that are going to take you multiple sessions to complete. It's not going to be fetch quests. It's not going to be go run around and get me 10 tails and 10 teeth and 10 ears and whatever. Um, and they had a hard time wrapping their head around how is there going to be enough content for the players to be engaged. And I said, well, you guys never played EverQuest, so it's hard to explain, but when you started off in Kelethan, as an example, and everybody migrated to what became called Orc Hill. It was this natural landscape point of interest that was just a high point with multiple orc camps around it, and you couldn't go there by yourself. So it was like you would start off killing the orcs on the outskirts solo, and once you got to like level 4, it was like those were getting a little too easy, so you needed to work your way up to that hill, but you couldn't do it without friends, so you had to get up with people, and that became known as Orc Hill. That was not a POI named by the game developers. That was a POI named by the
Emerging
players.
gameplay.
It was
Yep.
emergent gameplay back in 1999, and you can look at any of like going outside of the common lands. You had Orc 1, Orc 2, Orc 3 naming the different orc tents that you could go to. That is content. That is content that the players are creating. Um, I wonder how well that would go over in today's environment.
Yeah,
Um,
I'm curious too, because being a game developer, that's one of the things that we want to do in Defend the Night. So it's I think it's definitely. I just want to make when I go in a game. I just want to make heads roll. I want to talk to people. I want to make up stories. I want to have fun. I don't want to worry about go here, go here, go here, go here, go here, milk run here, do this, honey, do that, and then you might get some experience. I just want to make heads roll. I want to blow things up, and a little story here and there is pretty cool, as long as I can make them up as well.
so you're the tabletop guy who wants to constantly have combat.
That's me.
Yeah, at that point, you're like, if you don't want like a bunch of quest markers or waypoints, you gotta weigh heavily onto on the environment design,
Uh-huh.
making sure that there's like points of interest that people can see in the distance. Like, I want to go there.
Hmm.
And then
Where,
Yeah, perfect.
have something there so that when they
yeah,
get there, there's something for them to do.
something to kill, at least.
And then
Um,
make the obstacles ahead of that are challenging and rewarding to get there. So yeah, definitely, I agree with that. That's a good point. Got to have that plane clip very far, vast and large. Yep.
trying to think of
Cool.
going back to I'm also not a big fan of World of Warcraft. Not
Yeah.
not because yeah, and not for the traditional reasons probably. Um, I never played it when it came out because I was way too busy with EverQuest 2. Um, and I dabbled in it a couple of times over the years, but just never was able to get. It was just too easy and I didn't like the quest hubs. I did try Classic when Classic came out because we went in with our Saga Lucimi gaming community. We had about 80 people. We rolled in. We had a big guild. Well, big for us. 80 people was a chunk of folks, and I played for 6 months, and for the first time ever, I was able to actually immerse myself in. And here's the funny thing: I loved Warcraft 1, 2, and 3. I just didn't like World of Warcraft. Now, having played Classic, I did appreciate Classic a lot more, and I kind of like wished I would have been able to be involved with it when it came out because it was obviously a little bit different back then. But the one thing I did like is there is a lot of lore, but it's also not necessarily easy to find. So, as an example, the Dwarven race, I never knew this until I played Classic. Like, the Dwarven race were at one point in time these golems, these rock golems, these stone golems. And I had created the Dwerhe for Saga Lucimia, who were inspired by dwarves, but I took that back a few thousand years and said they're all going to be rock elementals. And I never knew that Warcraft had something similar to that. And then I'm in the game, and the interesting thing to me was that you don't, it's not out in your face, that lore. Like you have to actually go do dungeons, and as you're doing dungeons, you find these weird quests that you can only get if you've done these other 5 quests. And then you get this quest, and they send you here to get these pages. And if you actually take the time to read the pages, because the quest doesn't tell you, it's the pages that you're picking up that are for these quests. And if you're reading the pages, it's like, oh crap, this is the story of the dwarves and how they became, they went from a mud people to actual physical flesh. And I liked the way that that was presented in the game because it wasn't just handed to you on a silver platter by a quest dialogue that just told you the history. It was actually, you were only ever going to find it out if you read the items that were dropping from the world that you were getting from the quest, and you were paying attention to that kind of stuff. And that's the one thing I did like about that game is the way that they gave you the lore. And I don't know if they still do it like that because I've never really played the game. But the one thing that drove me nuts is the quest hub system because there was no interconnecting story that would lead you through the different places. It was literally just go here. They would give you a breadcrumb to go to this place. You would go there, and it would be 10 NPCs, and it would be the same thing every single quest hub. We need help because of this. Go kill these. Go gather these, and you're going to do that 20 times, and then we're going to send you off to the next quest hub, and it's going to be a different version of that. And I just got disconnected because it's like, what story am I pursuing at this point? The only story that's there is if you're like doing the epic raid content. Whereas opposed to one of the things I really loved about EverQuest 2 was there was an interconnecting story. I also like that about Star Wars: The Old Republic. This is where I say there are some aspects of theme parks that I like. I don't necessarily like being do the quest hub, quest hub, quest hub, quest hub, and the fetch quests. But the one thing I love about, say, Star Wars: The Old Republic is that you have the class storyline, which each one is about 40 hours in the original game, and you all get sent to the same planets, but you're doing different. Like the smuggler storyline is completely different than the Jedi Guardian storyline, which is completely different from the bounty hunter storyline. And the same thing with Lord of the Rings Online. You have the epic book quest, which is this overarching, you know, epic quest line where you're interacting with Aragorn and Gandalf and the characters. But then in between that, if you want to do the quest hubs, you can, because they still have those in both of those games where it's the rinse repeat. Ugh, have a hard time with those.
Yeah, it's but yeah, I mean it's one of those things, man. When it's too structured for me, I'm out. I'm out. I can't really get into it. It's just it's just something about me that wants, just advance my character uh, quickly by myself with no structure. It's not bad or it's not good. It's just the way I like it.
Have there been any games for either one of you? Any games that you've played and just within a matter of hours or days, you've just been like, nope, not for me.
That's actually most MMOs or most games actually. I'm a game taster. I like to sample a game for a few hours and
That's
then
a
I like to put it down and
good
like
way to talk
that
about
was
it.
good. That was good.
I
That
like
or
that.
that was fine. I
I'm
want
a
to try this
game
one out
taster.
though.
That's brilliant.
Taste tester.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that one. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot of games that I try. I don't think that they're bad. I just ah, there's something about them that just turns me off, and I just don't ever log into them again. Um, I think the last one that I really liked was Warhammer Online. And I know I said it before, and that's a long time ago. That's way back. So there isn't too many that I really like, which is why I'm making my own MMORPG. So that's one of those things where I feel that for me it's one of those things that has to happen. And I think there's a lot of games that start out really good, and then they just get really bad. Something happens with their payment structure or the monetization system, or it just gets watered down, and it's just not the same anymore. I'm sure you guys have a ton of those that you've ran across in history here the last 10 years.
I used to
But
be a taste tester, but I gave up on it years ago. There was a period up until probably 2008, 2009, because that was when I quit raiding full time in 2009. Because up until 2009, I was a full time hardcore raider, and so I used to sample a lot of different things. But after that, I'm trying to think. It's like I know 2011, I think, was when Star Wars: Old Republic came out. I'd been playing Lord of the Rings Online up until that point. Then I went over to that, tried that out. I think since then, I honestly can't say that there's a single. I could be missing something in my mind, but I don't think there's been a game since 2011, like a new MMORPG that I have actually looked at and went, I want to try that.
Mm.
I can't think of any. Um, I didn't even try. Was it called Wildstar? Was it called? That was one that was canceled a couple years ago.
I never
Mhm.
I didn't even try that game until like it was already on its way out the door, gonna be sunset, and I was like, I'm gonna go try this out just to see what it's like. And I did go play it for a few days and was like, meh, it wasn't for me. Um, I can't think of
Yeah.
any games that have come out since 2011 that I've actually gone and tried, like MMORPGs, or none that have like made an impression.
See, I tried Wildstar during the beta, and it was enjoyable, but it was definitely not. It was I'm like I used to say until I started playing Final Fantasy 14. I used to say I don't like tab targeting based MMOs, which is like most of them, unfortunately. But yeah, it was enjoyable, but it wasn't like my
Mm.
game.
Yeah, and you did just make me remind me that yes, I've played Final Fantasy 14 and ESO, so I have at least tried
So I
two
mean,
games.
technically,
I have tried two
but yeah,
games.
yeah. Back in the, I had a very different. I think I had a very different experience playing MMOs than you guys because somewhere between my middle school years and high school years, I probably tried like at probably every free to play MMO that was available at the time.
That might be a generational thing. I'm 40, so
Yeah.
I think I have a few years on you. I'm not
Yeah,
sure,
so
but
no, yeah, no, definitely. But so yeah, this was somewhere between like 2006 and 2012. So in between that period, I tried every single free to play MMO at the
there was
time,
I remember
mainly because
one.
I
Well, and that's why a lot of people try the free to plays.
yeah.
They were doing a Stargate MMO at one point in time, and I like the Stargate intellectual property,
Mhm.
and I did get involved in the alpha and beta for that, and unfortunately it went under. But I remember at the time that had to have been like 2008-ish, 2006, 2008, somewhere in there, I think. And it had a lot of potential, and they were making it a group-based game where it was four party members, just like the squad that you saw in SG1, where you're going through the gate and you're going off and having these adventures, and then you come back to the home base, and that was the single player component, where you can craft and do research and stuff. But yeah, have there been any on for both of you guys? What are some good examples of like good group-based or open world games that you think, whether it's modern or old? I know we often look back to the old ones and say, "Oh, it was great back then," um, but I'm curious to hear both sides of the equation. Old games, new games. What do you guys think are some of the games that we can look at and say these are good examples of games that have good open world content, good group content, even if we don't necessarily like these other things?
I don't know, man. Among Us right now, that's the big one, right?
Yeah. I mean,
Everybody.
is that an MMO?
No, it's definitely
It's
not.
just a
It's a party
multiplayer.
game. Yeah, it's a multiplayer game. But I mean, could you throw those aspects of that game into a virtual world? Yeah, why not? Uh, that's one of those things right now that I'm really paying attention to. Um, I know a game that I'm looking that I that I've looked that you have to look at is Roblox.
Hmm.
You have to, that player made content, that sort of thing has to be something you have to have in the back of your mind cooking, because what's going to keep your game the longevity of your game is not your developers, because they cost too much to make all this content. It's really, you know, the player created content that's going to keep you moving forward faster than, just your devs working on it.
Hmm.
So those are the
Yeah,
one.
if you can give your players a world and then let them build things in it, that's like that would be like the sweet spot. If you can if you have players generate quests
Mm.
in the world for you, there you go. You have
Well, I know
Now
they.
there's some kickback on some things like Neverwinter Nights that had a system. Is that what you're going at?
Well,
something like
yeah,
that. Yeah.
that was I think it was called the Foundry system, if I'm not mistaken, for Neverwinter Nights. It was also available for.
Star Wars Galaxies. I think they had some quest.
Yeah, I don't know, but I remember the Foundry. I think it was called the Foundry, but it was for I think both Neverwinter Nights games had that, where you could go in and people could make their own content using the game engine, using the assets, and then they uploaded it to the store. And I know that some of those were very well received. A lot of them were trash. But we're already moving in that direction with certain systems. I know there's, the one you just mentioned, Unreal has
Among
this
Us.
thing, and then there's, I was just reading the other day, there's a tabletop version. I would have to go look at it because it was up on Gama Sutra. But there's a tabletop version where they've taken the idea of Tailspire, but it's much, 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 much larger, and it's gonna be crowdsourced content, and it just got like $115 million investment, on top of a $17 million investment last year. So I mean, it's growing in leaps and bounds. But it's basically this huge open world 3D tabletop role playing system where everybody can come in, and this doesn't matter what system they're playing, they can come in and they have all these assets at their disposal, and they can build these 3D worlds that people could then come in and say, well, I want to use Pathfinder, and I want to use D&D, and I want to use Ravenloft or whatever. The concept of having crowdsourced content is great, but to do it at scale is a huge task that requires a ton of money. Um,
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, so that seems like a lot of out of our scope for like at least the next 5 years. What's good though is you could have your assets all the assets that you made as a company or an IP. You could have those assets used um, from your players, and they could make their own dungeons and systems to just be different than the the developer content that you're
the
making.
only flip
Yeah,
side to go ahead.
yeah, and it depends on your tooling. Like if you can make it really easy to create stuff, you're gonna end up with all this good player content. Otherwise, if it's a chore, this is like the equivalent of your dev tools, and not everyone's gonna figure it out. Then it might not be worth it, especially if your team is small.
I was also going to say on the flip side of that, I've seen this in action. For those of you who have never played Shadow of the Avatar, um, in the early, and you can still see it in some of the starter zones, because when they came out of Kickstarter, and they were just going into that first early access, they were crowdsourcing music and they were crowdsourcing asset creation, and so the a lot of the early zones have a mishmash of things. And so the art style is not very well defined. But then once they got past that and they had their team of, 10 artists or whatever it was, and they had a consistent art style, that's when you notice that it's like, here's this first, say, 10% of the game that looks like this mismatched patchwork thing. And then here's this other 80% or whatever, 90% that it's all unified and it looks very good, and it all has the same, at least it has the same style and flow. That's the only downside that I see to crowdsourcing like that, is you get the music is the worst part. Because
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out what you mean by crowdsourced music.
so they basically opened it up and said, we're going to let anybody write tracks and just send them in to us. And so you had all these different musicians sending in different types of music. And then they just started pulling things from that and using it for the different zones and cities and areas and dungeons and so on and so forth. And so it's not like, say, I always look at Lord of the Rings Online because the guy who worked on that movie, the composer, or worked on that game, the composer also worked on the movies. He worked on Avatar movies. He's an actual music composer. And so when you go into Lord of the Rings Online, it, the music is
Score, yeah.
different, but the score is there. Like, it's an actual score. And even though you have lots of different themes for lots of different places, it all sounds in that same, it's a Lord of the Rings themed music. So it's all sounds like Lord of the Rings music. Whereas the first time I ever logged in to try the Avatar, it was like I'm being bombarded by like all these different types and styles of music, and it was like, eh, which made it difficult for me. Um, because of the way they did that. But I have seen, I mean, that's the downside, I would say, is quality control, and you're going to get so much different things that just don't
Oh yeah,
match up.
Well, yeah, and I didn't mean for like your the game's main content. Like you definitely need some sort if you're doing not if you're not doing a pure sandbox, you need some sort of like curated content that you're developing. But if you can also have some tooling alongside that'll allow players to generate content, like if you can have a player in game generate some sort of quest line, it doesn't even have to be good. It doesn't necessarily be good, but it just has to be good enough for other players to want to try it
And
out.
also, I think you're probably talking about something like if you could give people an asset pack too,
Kinda.
and say, here's an asset pack. Here's a
Mhm.
couple of dungeons we've designed.
Mm.
Good luck. Have
Yeah.
fun.
So if you guys ever worked on emulators, they have
No, I have not.
editor. They have editor systems, and you could do like a web editor or whatnot, and it gives you these sort of assets, and you can call up these sort of mobs. And if you had all access to all those, you could place those in your world. That's
That's what you're
that.
talking about, Judah,
And
right?
I think that's cool.
Mhm.
Yeah, I
And
could see that.
it gives some creativity to the players.
As long as there's,
That's why emulators are so big right now. You got a lot of these emulators that are blowing up because you can do things like that in those emulators.
I always come back to the only nightmare scenario I have with allowing people to create their own quests is everybody going out there and
Make it something so easy.
no, no,
Yeah,
not easy. I think the nightmare scenarios of people doing, um, rape storylines or
Mhm.
things that somehow sneak past your quality control,
yeah,
um, and they get put into the game and someone plays it and goes, "Oh my God, I was just subjected to this
they, yeah. They
racist
make it.
thing," or
They make a zone, and then you pan out, and it's a large
"Judge
cock and balls.
Dick," you know,
Yeah,
Oh,
someone will do it.
that reminds me about what was it? What was the Lego MMO called? They
I
had
don't.
to
Don't even
they had
know.
to build like they had to build a way to identify any configuration of that for user submitted
Uh,
content.
yeah, yep. I could see it, man, because everybody likes to make those things like it's that mentality, that's adolescent mentality.
Maybe you're right. Maybe user generated content, no matter what, is going to be.
Well, I think as
It's
long as there's
like
quality control.
procedural content. It was like the holy grail of
Well,
endless content for a while.
everybody's played Age of Empires 2, right?
I've
Yeah.
not.
You have not?
I've not played any of the Age of Empires games.
Ooh. So they have scenarios where they give you the assets and you can make your own scenario and you can have everybody come and play in the scenario. It's just the same thing we were talking about, but it's only for it's up to 7 people or 8 people. Um, and they use all the assets. They built their own map, and they place their own units and everything. And you say go, and you got to destroy the other opponent or destroy the town or whatnot. And that's user created content, and they're huge. They were huge. I think Dota 2 does this too. They have the same kind of user created content, and that game is just insanely popular. So we're going there. This is probably a different subject though than what we're,
No,
we're
I
talking
think no. I
Well,
mean, I think
well,
it's in the same theme because we're talking
about.
open world, like having people create content for your game and create actual
Yeah,
open world group content.
mhm.
I think we're good.
yeah. So I mean, me and Brian, the other co-founder of Defend the Night, we talk about this all the time about how we could do created content and not just overload our servers and make everything uniform. So that's something we're always thinking about. That's the next wave.
Yeah, yeah. And for my game, I really want people to be able to own like a little bit of property and then build and store items there.
So that
So
that brings me to
to
a
get
good question because I don't know enough about your game. So when you're talking housing, are you doing open world housing or are you doing instanced housing?
I like to call it a half sandbox, half theme park. So I don't want you to just build your town anywhere. So I'm kind of curating like this is where the town is going to be, and then I'm going to zone like different properties. So you get this little predefined plot of land, and then it might come with a building on it already, probably just to have the town. But then you can demolish it, add rooms, expand it, make it however you want using using some prefabricated pieces, kind of like how the Rust building system is. But
Okay.
instead of just building anywhere, you get this little area to work in.
Well, will other players be able to see it or
Yes,
go
yeah,
into it and
that's
so
the
on and so
part.
forth?
Most of it's going to be in world.
Okay, because that was the one thing, like, as much as everyone loves like the EverQuest 2 housing system because of how cool it is with the decorations and everything else, the
Mhm.
reality is it's instanced. So you walk up to the building, you click the door, it's the same building for everybody, depending on what building you're renting or
Mhm.
apartment, whatever. But once you click on the door, you have the option of these 500 people who are renting this address, and just everyone has their own version of how they've decorated the interior of that place, versus, say, Star Wars Galaxies, where you could just pick. I guess you're explaining. You just said it with Rust as well. You just pick
Yeah.
somewhere on the environment and you can put something there. And then I liked how Vanguard did it too, because Vanguard, it sounds like you're doing something similar to what they did, where Vanguard had it where there was predetermined plots of land where, you know, you could, and each plot had different plots within it. So there was plots for one bedroom houses, plots for three-bedroom houses, plots for a few guild houses.
Hmm.
But that was a defined housing area. It was in the open world. It wasn't an instance, like it was still in the zone, but it was just this section of a zone that was no mobs spawn there, no mobs go there. It's this housing district. Um, I liked that as well,
Mhm.
which I thought added.
Yeah.
I thought it added to the open world flavor because you could be running through a zone doing quests and then you see a bunch of buildings off in the distance and you're like, ooh, what's over there? You go running over and you're like, oh, this is not a NPC village. This is a player character village. Cool. And maybe there's people there doing stuff and maybe it's just, dormant, but it was a fun way to add a little bit of extra life to the open world.
Yeah, and I like that. I want that all intermixed so that it adds to the people actually live here.
Mm-hmm.
There's a community kind of thing. But of course, this you get run into different issues. Like there's only so much space in the world, so you can run into housing shortages, which is why we're also planning like instanced apartments just in case.
It's good to have options. Are
Yeah.
you guys doing anything with housing or do you not have enough info yet on that, Scribbles?
Well, all I can say is what I like.
It's all
So
good.
I like EverQuest 2's instance housing. Um, I liked how other people could visit it. Uh, I like, but the thing about it is I like. I guess I could say that with our system, it's kind of both. It's we'll take a copy of your current house that you have, and we'll make it impactful to other players. So we'll make a copy of that house, and you could go in it and use their sellers or help them with their crops and everything. But it's not actually their house. It's a copy of their house. It's a proprietary system. I can't really go too far into it, but it's going to be both of those worlds, instance and open at the same time,
Just the one
which
thing.
is it's confusing to people. But they won't they won't think it's instance. What I'm trying to get at, they won't realize it's instance
Till they, yeah.
because,
So layering.
well, not really, because it's changeable. So if you understand that, it's
I
it
I I think I get it. Yeah.
yeah, it's a little different, but yeah, that's what we're going for, and so it's instance, but with some flavor, so you won't actually think it's just like a copy of a copy of a copy.
So the one thing I don't like about the Lord of the Rings online housing system is they have everything tucked away in housing instances, neighborhoods. So
Yeah.
you have a Hobbit neighborhood, you have a human neighborhood, an elf
Well,
neighborhood, and then you go in and they're carbon copies of each other. So it's like there's
copy of a copy
200
of
instances of the neighborhood, and they've only got like say 30 properties in each one. And it's just what they do is just as those sell out, they just spawn a new version of it. But the thing I don't like about it is it's very hard to have any uniqueness to your home because it's your home was always going to look like someone else's home. Um, and that was one of the things I loved about EverQuest 2 was because they did have I would estimate hundreds of different types of apartments, houses, castles, and so on and so forth that you could buy. And yes, they were all the interiors were all instanced, but you had lots and lots and lots and lots of options. Um, I think I don't like the way the Lord of the Rings Online does their housing too much, but I will say this too. They also have there's that housing, which is the free housing that everyone gets access to, and then they have the premium housing, which you can only get by paying mithril coins, which you can either earn through gameplay or um, you get Lotro coins that you can buy from the store. But it's like if you buy it, it's like $60 if you want to buy enough mithril coins. But the premium housing is like you go to Rohan and it's like you go into the instance and it's this Viking settlement basically. And there's a long haul and then there's all these really cool houses in the woods. Then you can go out to Gondor and you can get your own island, but that costs like hundred and some dollars, and it's like I'm not paying real currency for. I'm not that into housing that I'll pay real currency. But I do have probably 8 or 10 houses and apartments scattered throughout EverQuest 2 from the like 8 or 10 years I played that game. Um, and I have like half a dozen houses throughout Lotro. I don't know. Housing's a weird thing, but I do like the idea of. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm just thinking out loud. Housing's cool, but like hardly any MMOs really do it like well.
I
I
think
want
a lot of people always look back to Star Wars Galaxies and say that was like the crowning achievement of housing because you could put it anywhere, you could make anything you got from the world could be mounted, so any piece of armor, weapon, etc. could be a decoration in the house. But that was also a huge engineering feat,
Mm-hmm.
and something that can only be accomplished by, in my opinion, that's something that can only be accomplished by a AAA team. But the technology has also come so far these days that you know guys like us can go out there and actually create MMORPGs without needing $250 million budgets. So there is that to think about. But I do like the idea of having houses in the world because then you can see stuff. Um, you could see it and interact with it and be involved with people, even if it's instanced on the inside. Um, well, I know we lost Scribbles for a few minutes.
Scribbles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm back, guys. I'm
Oh,
just
you're good.
off camera here. 1 second.
All right.
Yeah. So the
I was gonna.
best thing with if you guys want to go back to the housing thing, I know that one house thing that I don't like is open world housing because the only people that I get really benefit from open world is the first people that are there to get the property early on. So we kind of went against that.
Hmm.
Like I think Arcage had their open world
The land grab or whatever
land
what do they
grab.
call it? Land rush.
Yeah. Yes. So
Yeah.
I think Shroud also had that. Only the people, and they did it. It was pay to win, so it was part of their crowdfunding. So the people who could afford, I mean, there were people who dropped $10,000 on plots for cities, and it was like, yeah, I'm never getting a premium plot because I'm not dropping real money for housing in a video game. Sorry. That's a good point.
Yeah. Again, yeah, downside of the open world housing. It's cool. It's cool if you could get something like along one of the main paths that a lot of people travel because it's right there. But then if you're not lucky, like you said,
And going back
and they
to
all
go ahead.
and they all sell out.
Yeah, and they'll
They're gone.
sell out quick, and then you're screwed if you come into the game 4 years later. Um, kind of spinning this back around to talking about stuff in the open world above and beyond just houses. Um, I've always looked at, I don't know how you guys feel about this kind of stuff, but in the early versions, you had like the wandering raid mobs that anybody could take out. They weren't related to content progression. They were just there for flavor, and they had cool loot, and they would spawn once a week or once every 2 weeks or whatever. And then I think in the modern version, you've got like the Guild Wars 2 example where you have the events that spawn. I think they do those in Final Fantasy 14 as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, they do.
Uh,
How do you guys feel about that type of content?
I
Which one do you prefer?
I like I like the in-world content like that that's just happening. Even if it's on a schedule, it makes the world feel more alive. Like, oh, that's going on right now.
mm, yeah, I think there should be spawned ones, maybe token spawns, because what happens is there's a lot of you know angst and competition amongst guilds that they'll sit on the spots that it spawns at, and they'll have their alts come out when the spawn happens, and they'll just take down the dragon like Gornair or just a lot of Everquest. You
I
know,
have some horror stories from that kind of
yeah.
shit back in the day. Yeah.
So you have to really, if you want to do this correctly, you want to have both kinds. You want to have real world spawns that the spawns happen organically, like on a timer, and there's other ones that for the lesser guilds that aren't going to be on it right away, you need to have some kind of system where they can actually turn in the tokens or whatnot to make that spawn happen. Maybe it's not going to be as lucrative dragon or mob, but at least they got a chance to test their wit against that dragon. I mean, it's not all about competition between other players. It's also about, can your team take over that dragon? Can't to advance? Overcome that obstacle. So yeah, spawning is very important. Whatever system that you come up with.
I really did appreciate that in there's two things that I like that have come about as a result of like the evolution of the game or the evolution of the industry, I should say, in terms of helping players be able to get through these big zones and be able to test their might with group-based content. The one is the triggerable content that they can spawn when they're ready for it. I loved seeing that in Vanguard because they had like these, they called them the golden mobs, and it was basically um, you could trigger an encounter if you were on the right quest step, and it would spawn, but it would only spawn for your group. Other people could see it, but they couldn't attack it because it was
Really,
literally
really important.
triggered to your group, or locked to your group. The other thing I loved, and I think this is my favorite like innovation to come out of MMORPGs, is persistent zones. Where, and I think World of Warcraft did it first, and then EverQuest 2 followed suit. But um, I only ever really played EverQuest 2, so I can speak to it there. But I remember the first time that I saw it was when we were raiding and we got into the Cunark expansion with EverQuest 2, and like going into, I don't remember the name of the dungeon now, but it was split into like four different wings, and there was like four or five, six bosses in each wing. And basically, your guild would go in, and it would be like one night you do this wing, clear it out, and then you log out. The zone saves, so it saves your progress. You come back 2 nights later, you go do the next wing, log out, and in this way you can go in and play for 3 or 4 hours and progressively beat the raid zone, as opposed to back in the day with EverQuest 1, where you had to go in and you had to just sit there and do it until it was done. And that led to those 18-hour sessions, which screw that. I'm way beyond that point of my life these days. So I love persistent zones and dungeons because it allows you to have the group content that
Yeah.
makes for fun encounters, but at your own pace and on your own schedule. And as much as I love open world and having everybody in one place, I also want I like that type of content to be instanced. Because the one thing I hate from back in the day in EverQuest was like getting keyed. This is gonna show my age a little bit, but getting keyed for Vextal for VT and the Luklin expansion, and 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 Lexer was talking about this in one of somewhere. I watched him talk about this in one of the shows where he was talking. He was in a guild where they played the asshole and locked down the spawn so that no other guilds could get keyed for that zone. and because they locked it down so that they were the only raid guild that could go do VT, and that's the kind of crap that I can't stand. So I love persistent instance content when it comes to raid and triggerable content. I think those are great things for group. I think those are good innovations for the group-based gameplay, getting away from the open world. Anybody can take it down kind of
Well,
mentality.
I like open world too because you have these guilds that like to fight each other to the race spawns, but just as long as you can't, you know, log out your character on top of the mob when it spawns, then you know.
I think my distinction has always been if it's for content progression, no one should be able to lock me out of content. But if it's just there
Oh
for
yeah.
fun, let people compete and do what they want. I will say to get around the spawn thing, the one thing we were doing with Saga is dynamic spawn points for all the boss mobs. So they never spawn in one point. They can spawn
Mm.
within a very large area. Um,
Yeah, but you're still logging out in that zone.
Hang on, maybe I misunderstood what you meant by that, by logging out.
So what happens is, okay, so I have an alt. I'm gonna log my alt out. Like say I have a level 50 enchanter and a level 50
You're saying
tank
like
and a level.
people who are like keeping their alts logged out there just to check see if the
Yeah.
mobs are up
Well, no, they got a ready-made uh, raid force sitting there,
in the zone.
Just waiting.
Yeah.
just waiting for that spawn.
No, no, I
If
get. Okay, I
they
understand
know,
what you mean
they
now.
know it's they know it's gonna be on a 7-day timer, so everybody, the next mob's gonna be, you know, Dreadlands, Cornairs coming up. So you have
Yeah, I
to
never
log
liked that.
out.
I would prefer to see it all dynamic. No actual set spawn timers, no set location where it spawns. And we toyed around with the idea too of having it's zones or mobs that could spawn within a 3 or 4 zone section.
Ooh,
Um,
that's nice.
Let them wander.
right,
Wander.
either let them wander or just have it dynamically spawn them within these 3 or 4 zones, which helps. My whole thing was I was always trying to encourage how do you prevent players from creating a wiki? And the only way you can do that is by, using dynamic spawning and, you know, who knows? It's probably more complex than it's
That's the can of worms right there.
but
There's always going to be data mining, and
and
people
people
do
who just know
that.
life it
Yeah. So
and never leave the zone.
people, yeah, people get rich off your spawn points and your quest. So all I have to do is write a video on your quest, and so it's going to be there no matter what. So it's either going to be on YouTube or it's going to be in Wiki. It's going to be out there. It's just you just gotta deal with it. More content, more content, more content.
Yep. All right. Well, we're about an hour and 15 minutes in, so we can probably wrap this up. Um, Are there any other things that you guys can think of that are good, bad, or ugly about group-based or open world content that you think you could throw into the fire since we're here tonight?
Uh-oh.
Um, Group's good.
No, I just
Group
we
is
said
good. I like it. It's
Yeah,
simple.
group's good. Random matchmaking groups can be very iffy. Um, Sometimes I wish they would last longer, just to get that camaraderie up.
That's a good.
yeah.
I've
I
talked about that in the past. I've made the joke many times in the past that the concept of these hard mode dungeons that you can do in 15 minutes, I've had shits that last longer than 15 minutes. So you can't tell me that something that can be done in 15 minutes or less is hard.
you need
Um,
to eat more fiber, buddy.
well, I like to
You
just
need
sit there and read a
fiber.
book.
Uh,
But
Yeah, it's more about screen time at that point.
yeah, I'm just sitting here working on reading something or playing a game. But it drives me nuts when people call a 15-minute dungeon hard mode. Um, because I remember dungeons taking days in EverQuest, like to clear. And I've heard stories that the early World of Warcraft dungeons took a few hours. And I know, having played Classic a little bit, there was a couple of dungeons that took us like 2 hours. And I think Sunken Temple took us like 3 the first time we did it, but I had never been in any of those places, so I was very much wanting to see every nook and cranny and do every quest that I had, and so I was making the people with me be like, "Let's go over here. I need to do this. I need to do this," and they're like, "No, we gotta go for the boss mobs," and it's like, yeah, we'll get there. Like, I need to see I've never done this before. I'm trying to, um,
Right.
but I haven't seen dungeons last a long time since like pre 2010. Like ever since 2010, I feel like dungeons are, you know, 30 minutes. Like I
Yeah, yeah. I'm totally there with you, buddy. I just wish, like, because we're talking. I hope we're talking to some younger folks out there that would just, just go out of their comfort zone and try to do those shared experiences with people, just not trying to get that
it's so much fun.
instant
It's so
shot
much
in the
fun.
vein.
Like
Yeah, so if they
Judah was
just
saying, the
go out there.
camaraderie.
Hmm.
Mm,
Yeah,
mm,
that's one of the things I'm not particularly fond of like Final Fantasy 14 is like, yeah, it's nice to be able to run a dungeon in 15 minutes, but really, but with just with random public people, it's like I'm never going to see these people again.
yeah,
So I'm more likely than not we're not even chatting
and just go
at all.
outside your comfort zone and just get to know somebody too, so you can throw up some high fives here and there. I know it sounds lame, but it's cool. You
And
lifelong friends. I mean, I talked to the same people I played EverQuest and World of Warcraft, not World of Warcraft, but Warhammer Online. Um, you know, lifelong friends now, just because we just went outside our box and said, "Hey, how you doing? You want to do this again next week?"
I have a friend
I
of
mean, that
mine,
stuff's great.
James. Him and his wife, I met them when I was playing EverQuest 1. They happened to be living in the same area. I lived in Greeley, Colorado, and they lived in Loveland, Colorado. Excuse me. No, they lived in Boulder. Sorry. So we would meet at the halfway point was Loveland, and there was a really cool pizza and beer joint with his amazing seasoned fries. Oh man. Anyway, we would meet up there every Tuesday, and it was him and his wife. So I met them before they had kids. I helped them move and stuff, and then they went back to Canada, and I haven't seen them in person since I think probably 2000 or 2001. But we've remained friends over the years. He's read all the early drafts of my books. I've watched their kids grow up on Facebook, even though I've never met their kids in real life. We've played games off and on periodically over the years. Um, and that's all because back in the day, when you had to group up with people and you had to go do dungeons with people, and you would spend hours
Mm.
and days and weeks with the same group of people, you became lifelong friends with these people. And it's not going to happen for all of them, but that's that's one of those case studies I like to look at and say, I've known that person for 20 years now because of a freaking video game.
Yeah, well, Renfield, that's what you call you hit the sweet spot. That's what this genre and gaming is all
It's
about.
what it's supposed to be about, damn
It's
it.
supposed to be that way.
That's the magic.
And that's what we're all trying to get back to with the various projects that we're
Yeah,
involved
yeah,
in.
and I guess there's just too much content churn right now in
It's
the current
true.
design. It's all very sped up.
It's
Like, just
true.
take a little bit of time, go a little slower.
Breathe, immerse. Nothing wrong with savoring the flavor, so to
Mhm.
speak. So I would urge everyone, if you are interested in games that are going to have you invest a little bit of time and get to know people and are group based and involve you interacting with other people, check the links below to these guys' various projects because they've both got cool MMORPGs that are being worked on. You can follow the links below, go to their websites, join their discords, so on and so forth. And let's make sure that we can continue having MMORPGs be about open world group based content and not just single player stuff. Together alone.
Jeez.
All right, folks, that's going to be the
Guys,
cutoff point here. Thank you so much for joining. Don't forget to hit the bell icon, subscribe button, all the good stuff. Check out the links, and we will see everybody in the next episode.